Morning, everyone. Just waiting for everyone to join, and then we'll crack on. Right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second of 3 streams we've gone live with since the launch of TicketCo TV. Thanks for your continued interest, of course. And if you did miss the first webinar, let us know. We can make sure we send out a copy of the content to you. So the first webinar was on how to get started with TicketCo TV and why we've launched it. And this webinar is mainly focused on the legal implications of hosting a live concert or a digital event. We've got Alistair and Oana here from DAC Beechcroft, who'll be able to give you a bit more of an insight into what you need to bear in mind whilst building or working on your new innovation in terms of streaming and digital content. So I'm going to pass over to Alistair, who'll be able to give you a bit more information. If you need to ask any questions, just pop it in the chat on the right-hand side. And Oana is available to answer those. And also Alice is going to stick around after and answer some of your questions too. So feel free to pop them into the chat box and we'll get through them throughout the webinar.
Thanks, Joe. Let me just bring up the slides. Great. So, yep. Hello, everyone. As Joe said, I'm from DAC Beachcroft. My name's Alistair, and I'm an associate in our technology and media team. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Oana. Just to give you a very quick overview of the firm, we are an international law firm with around 40 or so specialist tech and media lawyers. So as you can imagine, we're very excited to be involved in what's a very innovative and practical solution in light of what's going on at the moment. As Joe mentioned, the purpose of this talk is to provide a very brief overview of the key things to think about from a legal standpoint in relation to the live streaming of concerts. It's obviously worth mentioning that we could sit here and talk about legal issues around live streaming and media generally for days, with issues ranging from kind of broader regulatory stuff all the way down to the nitty-gritty technology law issues around the underlying system. So with that in mind, and to preserve everyone's sanity, this presentation is very much non-exhaustive, but I hope you find it useful. And I've tried to focus on what I think are the key issues. So broadly speaking, in this model, we have 4 key players fulfilling a role. So firstly, we have what we're referring to as the organizer, and that could be a physical music venue or music festival company, a comedy club, or similar. And this is essentially the party booking the artist and recording the live content. We then obviously have the artist or the performer, without whom this wouldn't be possible. And I suppose the point to make in relation to those people is they will have rights in all of this, which they will want to preserve for obvious reasons, and I'll come on to that shortly. We then, of course, have TicketCo. Again, I'll expand on their role in a moment. And finally, we have the organisations known as collecting societies, which people here may or may not have come across. Again, I'll talk in a little bit more detail about their role shortly. There is a bit of uncertainty about what they do, how different functions are divvied up between the different societies. For the purposes of today, The main one to be aware of is the Performing Rights Society, otherwise known as PRS for music. So, as everyone here will hopefully have heard, this new model is being powered by TicketCo's pioneering all-in-one solution, which essentially is the tech facilitating payment and access to live stream content. TicketCo is acting as an intermediary in the setup, essentially giving organisers the tools to do what they usually do, apart from obviously letting people in the door. So from a legal standpoint, actually between physical concerts and live streaming, there's very little difference. The organizer is still making content available to the public, which is a defined legal term, and as you might imagine, it's defined very widely, and will therefore need the usual clearances to do so. And I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a moment. So again, the only real difference here is the technology which allows organisers to make the content available. One point I should make there is it goes without saying that TicketCo makes no claim of ownership over any of the content transmitted. And that brings me on to IP. So I hope you're sitting comfortably, because I'm going to get a bit legal for a moment. So as I mentioned earlier on, in this live streaming context, there are obviously lots of rights flying around that need to be preserved and protected. Without going into too much detail, the sort of content, or as lawyers would term it, works we're talking about here, will automatically be protected as copyright, which is a kind of IP right. Now, copyright subsists in qualifying works automatically, unlike other IP rights, which need to be registered in order to provide protection, like patents, for example. Clearly, the main purpose of copyright protection is to protect against infringement. So in this context, the live streaming would constitute broadcasting content in public. And obviously, if that's done without permission, then it will be deemed as what's known as a primary infringement. And I won't bore you with too much detail on the difference between primary and secondary infringements. Primary essentially means that knowledge and intention isn't relevant to whether you're liable or not. So it's important that the relevant rights are in place at the outset. So obviously the question is, how do we get around this? And as everyone should hopefully know, someone who owns IP is at liberty to give someone else the ability, by way of a license, to use that IP for certain purposes. So in these circumstances, the organizer will need the appropriate licenses in place for the activities proposed. And as I move on to the next slide, I will briefly touch on how that all works. So collecting societies, which people may or may not have come across, they play a key role here. So I thought it would be useful to just quickly cover off what their main role is and how licensing works in practice. So obviously, if businesses wanted to use or broadcast, businesses wanting to use or broadcast music had to obtain licenses from individual artists and performers, then that's clearly going to be impossible. So that's where collecting societies come in. In the UK, there's a slightly confusing setup where you have the organisation known as the Performing Rights Society, or the PRS, and Phonographic Performance Limited, or PPL, who were up until 2018 completely separate organisations. So PRS representing songwriters and the like, and PPL representing performers and record companies. In 2018, they formed a joint venture to streamline certain functions. I won't go into what the distinctions are between the JV and the separate organisations. For the purposes of today, and for TicketCo TV, everything to do with online music and using music online is still administered by PRS. So yeah, the main role of these societies is firstly to deal with copyright licensing on behalf of their members, and they will cover by virtue of global network agreements that they have in place with other societies, they will cover the vast majority of commercially released music globally. And they also ensure that artists and the like are paid for the use of their content in the form of royalties. In terms of getting hold of a license, they're obtained directly from the relevant society. So again, everything around using music online is through the PRS. And as you may have expected, there are different license bands with varying cost levels linked to different levels of revenue derived from the service and different kinds of digital streaming service. And I've included a link there on the slide to the relevant section of their website. And there's lots of information on there about the different bands. And having spoken to their advisors fairly recently, they're a very helpful bunch over the phone. So they can answer most questions around the different sorts of licenses they offer. And yeah, the other obvious area to touch on here is contracts. It's probably not necessary for me to talk about specifics or small print here, because I'm sure everyone enjoys reading small print in their spare time. But it's helpful to probably quickly look at things from a high level on this. Aside from the license obtained from the collecting society, which is obviously a contract in itself, there are, of course, contractual relationships being formed here between TicketCo and the organizer, TicketCo and the ticket buyer, so the audience member, if you like, and also the organizer and that member of the audience. And I know that TicketCo, as part of the UK launch, will be, I think they have or will be uploading soon their UK terms and conditions covering the service being provided to the organizer and the use of the TicketCo functionality by the ticket buyer, so that they're there to see. It obviously goes without saying that all the key players should familiarise themselves with the contract language, how the various rights are set out, relevant restrictions and obligations, and so on. And obviously, when it comes to restrictions, this will be important in the context of what the end user does with the content. So it might be that they should be prevented from doing certain things with the content. The main thing I'm thinking of here is private recording of that content. Clearly, that's going to be difficult to police in practice. There may be technical ways of doing that, but it's obviously important that this is covered in the contract, the sort of terms and conditions language, and it's brought to the user's attention. And I believe, although I think this is probably covered in one of the other webinars around the customer journey, but I believe the TicketCo kind of functionality and customer journey allows a legal terms module, which allows different options to be selected around how the terms and conditions work. So those are the main issues that I want to quickly cover. Hopefully that's all made sense. As Joe said at the start, if there are any questions, feel free to stick those in the Q&A or post those in the webinar page, and yeah, happy to answer those now, or once we've logged off, we'll stick around to answer those as well.
Great, thanks, Alice. That's perfect, and yeah, really good insight into what we need to really consider when organising these events. As Alice has mentioned, if there's any questions, pop them in the chat. He's available to answer those over the next couple of minutes. We are going to end the video stream for the webinar, but the chat function will remain open. So any questions, fire them in there. Thanks for your time, and we'll send out the information on the next webinar as soon as it's available.